So here's our scene. And now I think we're ready to start adding some textures and lighting to it. The next thing I wanted to point out was you can see this even in this rendering. Do you see this, the staircase staggered kind of effect of the shadow right there? That's something that's called anti-aliasing, this right here. So if you're in standard mode, you can change this to best and it will render smoother. See how now it's a nice straight line? Also, if you choose, and I prefer to do this, there's different renderers you can use. The physical renderer automatically has that built in, so you don't have to worry about it. And it will render out a much nicer, smoother kind of line too. So that's just the, I think its default is the standard renderer. I recommend changing it to physical. Okay, so let's talk materials. We'll go through some of the basics of materials and see what the functionality does, and then we can break down into more specific questions about those later. So to create a material, just go down to the materials palette, hit create, materials, new material. If we double click on this material, we have the material editor come up. And the thing to remember here is you're going to be working on any of the functionality by having it highlighted and checked, all right? So color is the most basic of these, and of course if you click in here you can change the color of any object you're working on. You can type in percentages, you can work in RGB if you want, you can do a multitude of different things just with the color function. Brightness down below, the next tab, allows you to control the hue of the color. So you can essentially make it a little bit darker, or 100% gives you that full color, all right? The next one is the texture mode, right? And this allows you to bring in a variety of other things. So for example, we've already used noise in the past, so you could bring in a noise channel. And if we click on this, we could change even the color of the noise if we wanted to. So if I went with that green color, maybe a darker green and yellow, here, I could have a multitude of textures like that, right? And of course, with the noise, you can change the seed and you can change the scale to fit your needs of the project, okay? So that would be a basic way of using the texture. If I put this on an object now, you can see that I'm getting that noise channel wrapping around the cube of the object. If we go further with that, we can also, let's shift this color a little bit here. So this color, let's make this more of a violet so we can see this. When you have something in texture, and in texture you can have a photo, you can have a shader, you can have a noise channel, you can do a bunch of different things, you can have a gradient. You can always mix these together, okay? So here down below you have mix mode at normal right now. Mix strength is 100%, which means there's no mixing happening. If I bring it down to 50%, then I would see this purple color coming through to this. So it effectively makes your top layer, which is the texture layer, 50% transparent. Okay, kind of like in Photoshop when you're using layers, you can change the opacity of the layer to give it transparency. So if we look at that render now, we should see that shift, right? It applies that mix. Now, another thing is that if we go back to 100%, we have different types of mixing modes. So if you do add, it's going to attempt to add all those values together and give you a combination of those different color forms. So it's a little bit different than having 50%. It kind of attempts to match the hues accordingly. Subtract is going to almost make a negative of your image, right? So it's going to take those colors and kind of flip it to the inverse. So here now we have what was that kind of violet-y color in add becomes more of a green hue. So it kind of, again, reverses or inverts the colors with subtract. And of course, percentages can give you different effects. So 50% is going to give you more of a different kind of quality there. And then finally, multiply kind of takes all those colors and ramps it up and gives you a much different version of it. So it's something to kind of play around with to see what happens when you start to mix those channels together. I'm going to go back to just normal here and show you a few more functionalities of the texture that are built in. So under gradient, you can have a variety of different gradient forms. So for example, if I did a radial gradient or a circular gradient, I could double click on this and choose the color there. That didn't work. Choose the color there, choose the color here, and I can get a different sort of gradient. And we can see that it's taking each face of the cube and applying that gradient to it, right? Other things we can do with color, there are a variety of effects. So you just kind of have to go through these and see what they do. But let's see, what are some ripple effect? Kind of gives you a little bit of a bumpy surface. These work better in combination when you're building multiple materials, especially with the noise channel. I tend to use the surfaces a lot more. So surfaces have options like checkerboard, for example. And checkerboard, you can change the frequency. If you do lower, you'll get larger squares. You can do the color. Change the color of the squares. And that allows you to have a variety of different modes as well. So that's checkerboard. There's also things like, I recommend just going down to surfaces and playing around a little bit. Fire gives you a different sort of look. These are all, again, built-in things that you can kind of tweak and move. Rust is kind of interesting. It gives you that kind of like alpha channel noise sort of shader that you can adjust. And again, any of these things, if you click on here, you can adjust the color of what you're working with and adjust the percentages of those things as well, and how much rust is going to be happening and not, and what frequency that it is. So those things can really adjust and change. So I recommend playing around with the surfaces and and also the gradients, the noise channels, and again, you can always have your mix mode work in between those as well. Now the last thing I'll talk about in terms of color is the idea that you can load in an image, all right? So I'm just gonna go to load image, see what we have on here. This dirt, actually, where's the dirt? Here, this one, all right. So here's an image of dirt. I just searched online to find a dirt image, and you can see it's gonna render out, again, that square on each side of my composition, right? Now, and again, you can have your mix strength change. So if I bring the mix strength down, I can make this more like a purple dirt. You can get that kind of view. So you can get the multitude of layering again with the color image. I do want to talk a little bit about, let's not do the mix mode here. I want to zoom into cube a little bit. Keep zooming out. Ay, this mouse. All right, so let's zoom in here, and I'm going to change the lighting so we can see the cube a little bit better. Okay, so here you can see the texture is getting repeated on all sides, so one per side. If I want to change that, I can click on the material in the object manager up here, and it's going to give me different tags for types of mapping. If I were to do a spherical mapping, it's going to look much different. It's going to try to wrap it around as though it's a sphere instead of a cube. So it's going to be a different type of look, right? It's almost like you see the top part that's condensing like a globe would be, and then it's trying to wrap around in those sort of dimension. If you do cubic, is going to be pretty, it's going to read just like the standard is this UVW, which is attempting to place the material on the actual polygons that you have. The other thing that you can do is you can change the amount of tiles. So now there's one tile per side, basically. The U and the V have one tile. So if I make this 2 tiles, then I'll get that to repeat, right? So you can see, and you can kind of see the line here, right? We rendered this out. You can see how it's repeating, and there's this line that gets repeated again and again. And that's because the material in and of itself is just kind of becoming a patchwork, like it's taking those squares and repeating it a bunch of times over. If you click on seamless, it's going to attempt to try to take those seams and hide them. It doesn't do a great job. We can still kind of see an edge that's the same over the whole thing. So if you want to have it be more, if you don't want to see those seams, you need to find a material that's seamless. You can find them online. You can just search seamless textures. You can, there are some in the content browser. But if I change this, I can show you what I mean. So I'm going to load in a seamless. This old wood is a seamless one. Is it that one? Yeah, I think this one is seamless. And so if I put that on here, it still doesn't look seamless. Let's see. I did have one somewhere. Where did I have it? Well, let's see if we can find one. Let's do that. All right. Let's see if we can use this. I can't tell if it's seamless or not. Doesn't look, well, maybe. All right, let's see what that one does. No, that one's not seamless either. All right, let's see if we can find one in the content browser. Well, I think there should be one in here. All right, this one. I'm pretty sure this one is. All right, if you want to grab one from the content browser, you can just simply drag the JPEG image into this, and it'll give you that. All right, here we go. So this one, if we look at it, this one is seamless in that, you know, you can see, obviously see a repetition of the tiles, but we don't see the lines sort of cutting through from one to another. So basically a seamless texture is going to be one that if you look at it in its entirety, the bottom lines are going to match up directly with the top lines, and the left lines are going to match up directly with the right lines, so you overlap that. And the way you would do that is you take a photo. If you want to take a photo and make it seamless, you take a photo, cut off the left side, drag it over, paste it onto the right side, and blend the seam together, and then do the same with the top and the bottom, so you get a seamless texture. It's a little bit of Photoshop work, but it can be really effective if you're using multiple materials. So again, seamless texture is one that's going to allow you to have that repetition without seeing a hard edge line across it. So that's something to consider as you're working into color. All right, so that pretty much wraps up the way that you can use color for those basic defaults. All right, now let's talk a little bit about transparency. The next one that's used probably the most with reflectance would be transparency. So if we take a color, transparency can have a color. Actually, let's not do that. Let's give this a color first. There we go. I don't want to. All right. So for this, let's talk about the next one, which is going to be transparency. We'll add a new material. And for this, I'm going to give it a color. Let's make it that nice violet color, and then add transparency. So transparency, brightness is how transparent it is. So 100% is 100% transparent, 50% is 50% transparent. And if we navigate like this and add the material here, you should be able to see that object through the other one. So if we render this out, we're getting a slightly transparent. You can still get a little bit of the surface. Let's make it a little more. Let's make it like 75 so we can see through it better. So there we go. We're starting to see through it a little bit more. It does have a reflectance on the surface, so let's turn that off for a second so we can see this a little bit more. And we're still getting a lot of reflectance. We should be able to see through it. There we go. All right, there we go. It's definitely refracting through. I think that's what we're seeing as well. It's attempting to take the geometry, which is kind of cool. Transparency never really did that before, which is great. So the refraction preset here is glass, and you could change that if you wanted to. I don't know, what's the refraction of milk? I'm not sure, but it's calculating in how you're gonna see through that object and how it's gonna refract accordingly. So if we do more transparency here, let's see what we get. There we go. Just looking at a lot of reflection, but it's attempting to kind of make transparent that, that material and give you the glass-like surface that it would refract through. So it should be able to cast light through it. Let's see what happens here if we zoom out. Do we see the light refracting through? Okay, so you can see how the shadow is different, right? Translucent object, you're gonna have the shadow appear through it in a little bit different way than you would with a solid object. It's gonna be less dense. And if we make this 100% transparent, let's see what happens here. Okay. All right, let's see what that does. So it's a little bit less. So the transparency allows you to have a different sort of refraction rate, and you can change those accordingly based on the refraction preset and how bright it is, all right? So that becomes really helpful when you're building obviously transparent objects and how they refract accordingly. So playing around with these different presets. PET is a type of plastic. It's kind of hard to see the differences here, isn't it? So transparency, again, through there. You can also have a color to the transparency. So the absorption color, if we made that different, we should be able to see a difference there. Oh, I'm sorry, not the absorption color. Transparency color. There we go. So the transparency color is different than the color of the object, and we should have a little bit of a different cast as light goes through it. Let's see what we get. Okay, there we go. See how the green is coming through a little bit? So you can control it's obviously way too much, but we could skew this down to a really, almost a white color, and still see a little bit of that green tint kind of coming through. So it allows you to really change the way that you see the color. If we're looking like this directly through the sunlight, let's see what we see. So we're getting that like, as though the inside of it is green and the outside of it is that violet kind of color. So it can be a cool way to experiment with different sort of gem-like kind of colors and things like that. On this perspective, we get it to be that sort of color there. So transparency is a pretty interesting thing to play with. And absorption color, I'm not sure actually. Let's see what happens if we make absorption color blue. It looks like it's going to add that blue contrast to it. Yeah, so we get a little bit of that blue that gets absorbed. And then let's look at it this way. There we go. It still has the green tint plus the blue tint. So it's merging those things together to try to create a really evocative kind of material. It looks like it also overrides the reflectance as well. So transparency has some new features, which is pretty cool. Okay, so transparency, if we make a new material, we can also talk about reflectance. So color here, I'm just gonna make a very dark color. And we have reflectance on. The default is gonna be specular. And specular, let's do this over here. If we take this material and add it to this, we check out what it looks like with a standard kind of specular. We're going to see the faces kind of appear lightly lit, not reflecting light, but rather giving us just that bit of sheen. So you can change the fall off and the width of these things. So if I make this much skinnier, The specular is going to be more highlight. If I make the strength higher, it's going to be a much brighter sort of surface. Probably hard to see on this object, but we're getting a little bit more intensity of that face that it's hitting, and everything else is becoming dark. Whereas if this is a wider specular, that's way too wide, then I'm going to get more of the object getting that specular sort of hitting it. If we want this to be reflective, though, we have to add a layer, and any of these are going to give you that sort of quality. I'm going to use this GGX because I like the way that it has the different features here. So with 100% strength, it's going to give you something that looks like this, where it's attempting to reflect all surfaces. We're not seeing any of the color through it at all. So a couple of things you can do here with a layer, you can have less percentage of the layer, so you get more of that color to come through. So now I'm getting a little bit darker color, especially in the shadow areas, to come through. If I bring it way down, we should be able to see more of that color kind of coming through, so you can control how much is being reflected or not. You can also change the roughness. So if it's really rough, it's going to give you more of that kind of speckly kind of sheen across the surface, right? If it is zero roughness, then you'll get just a kind of a glossy, almost mirror kind of finish on the surface. You can control the bump strength, which can be less, the specular strength, which can be more. You can do a variety of different things in that shader in and of itself. And you can also change the color of the reflectance as well. So if I wanted to add a little bit of a gold color here, it would change that and make the reflections look like they're reflecting that kind of gold color. So that can be something that's kind of interesting. You can also add a texture to it. So if I have a noise channel on here and I make this, that gold color, and this, maybe a yellow color, I would get that kind of quality of that noise channel on the surface. So I'd get a little bit of that speckling with reflection and kind of combination of those things kind of working together. So there's a lot you can do with reflection. And of course, if we just do a little bit, let's see, that looks like didn't really affect it too much. Here mixed strength is what I wanted, not brightness. Crank the brightness up. There is a mixed strength. So you could just have a little bit of the noise shader coming through to give a little bit more variety on the surface. So reflectance, again, in combination, you can layer up a whole bunch of different layers as well. And I do recommend that if you are looking at any of the shiny objects in the content browser, for example, any of the metal ones, just open some of these up and see how they're using the reflectance channel. So for example, like this one, just open this up. Oh, this is made a different way. We can't look at that one. Some of them are made for other, let's see about this one. Okay, here we go. So you can see in the reflectance channel how it's using the different layers. You can change the additive or subtractive, how much roughness, those sort of things kind of coming through, and can give you a better look and feel of how you want your object to look. Let's see what that one looks like. Take that off. All right, there we go. So that's just one from the content browser. Maybe not as cool as ours that we made. All right, so color, transparency, and reflection give you a variety of different combinations that you can utilize. Do you guys have any questions as we continue this? Let's see. Any chat questions? Pretty clear on those things? Okay, so we're going to move on and talk a little bit further about some material presets that we can look at. All right, so let's see. Okay, so let's do a new material. And I wanted to talk, so we've talked a little bit about the difference between bump and displacement, but I kind of just want to go over it one more time so you guys can see how it can be used. Let's just actually go to this wood material. And you know what I'm going to do with this? I did find this in the content browser. I just want to let you guys know that if you wanted an image from the content browser and you wanted to manipulate it, what you can do is double click on it in the content browser and it'll come up in the picture viewer. And then you could save this image, and I'm just going to hit OK. And I'm going to save this to just the desktop so I can work with it a little bit. All right, so there it's on the desktop. Now, what I wanted to talk a little bit about with the bump channel is sometimes, like when we look at this wood box, right? Let's zoom in a little bit here so we can see that better. All right, so the wood box, right now, if we render this out, it kind of looks like wallpaper. I mean, it definitely has a wood kind of quality, but there's the light and shadow are not affecting on the grain at all. So if I wanted to bring this out further, I could make a bump channel out of that material. And so the way to do that would be if you, well, in any editing software, even if, you know, if you have something simple, even in PowerPoint, you could probably do this. But if you go into Photoshop, find that wood texture and open it up. All right, I could take this and convert it to a grayscale image. Just go mode, grayscale, discard. Okay, and then if I bumped up the contrast, I'm just going to hit the levels. So that's under image mode or adjustments and levels. I'm going to bring up the highlights pretty bright and the shadows pretty dark to try to get a nice range from very dark to very light and some grays in between. And that should work pretty well. You save as on my computer. Replace it. Looks like I did that one already. Okay, so what I can do with this now, if I go back to Cinema, is I can load in a bump channel with that material. So I'm going to find the black and white wood that I made and load that in. Okay, and what that's going to do is, if we render this out now, we should be able to get a little bit more detail and dimension on the surface. It's hard to see with what we have here. So I'm going to go to the cube. I'm going to make the tiles 1 instead of 2 so the texture is a little bit bigger. And let's try to get a little bit more contrast on this so we can see what we're doing here. All right. You can see a little bit how the grain is becoming more pronounced. And actually, we can take the bump and increase the strength. Let's go negative instead of positive. Just do like 50%. And here we should be able to see, yeah, a little bit more. You see how the grain itself is starting to have a little bit of dimension across the surface? It's starting to feel like it's raised a little bit. So that can be an effective way. And of course, if I were to take the channel off of color, well, I don't want it black though. Let's clear this image and make this, we'll make it pink, why not? You can see the wood grain showing up on the surface, right? So it's taking that bump channel that we made in black and white and giving it that kind of quality across the surface. So that's definitely a great way to use to accentuate your textures, is creating a black and white image on the bump channel of a color channel that you have loaded in. Go back to the wood here, do that. All right, so then, you know, the other thing that we could discuss would be the differences between the displacement and, make this 72. Let's bring in a new sphere. Talk a little bit about this thing. All right, so if we were to create a new material And I am just going to make this kind of a yellowy color. And let's go to bump again, and let's load in another image. I took that dirt image and I made a black and white of it in Photoshop, just like I did the other one. So let's just look at this as a bump channel, as a displacement, and see what the difference is, just so we can make sure you guys are clear on that. So the bump channel, I'm going to ramp up the texture there so you can see it. If we look at this, it's going to take that dirt texture and give it a really nice surface across, right? And if it's very subtle, you know, this actually looks pretty good and fairly believable. The edges are not bumpy at all, right? So if we zoom into that and we really want to get a nice detailed look, you know, the bump is going to give you a nice flat surface, but it's not going to change the overall physical dimension of the object. So this can be really great for flat things, for, you know, certain, like the wood grain, it works pretty well on. But if we want this to have a physical kind of texture, we need to use a displacement channel instead. So let's actually, if you, oftentimes when I'm rendering fine-tuned sort of things, like working with materials and textures, I'll render to the picture viewer. And, you know, oftentimes when we render the picture viewer, we set up a save file that we're going to use. We give it a path. I'm going to make sure that this has no path at all in the editor. I'm sorry, in the renderer settings. And this way, if I do this, I can get a quick overview rendering of the scene. See what that looks like. You can zoom in and out in the picture viewer, just like you would in a viewport. Okay, so there we go. It's pretty good. And then let's compare that to, I'm going to take this bump channel. I'm going to go copy shader. Okay, and I'm going to go to displacement and do paste shader. Okay, so that in and of itself is going to give me a much different quality. So if I turn off the bump and I put this, oh, it should be already on the material already, so that's good. If I render it, you're probably not going to see anything. This object actually needs to be editable for the displacement to work. Okay, and there it's giving me a really kind of pixelated quality of that based on the geometry of my sphere. Okay, so this isn't great. I'm not crazy about it. So if you wanted to do something like this, you would want to first ramp up the polygons quite a bit and then add the displacement to it. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to get back to my polygon object. Actually go forward again. And instead of, turn the bump off there, instead of doing just this normal sort of displacement, I'm going to go down to this thing called sub-poly displacement. And what this does is it sort of like adds imaginary polygons and adapts the surface based on the perimeter of your object. So if I click on this now, we'll see a difference of what this will look like. No, we won't. Okay, come on. Let's see. Displacement is on. Well, no, you shouldn't have to. It's a, let's see. Oh. With sub-poly displacement, it doesn't have to be. Let's just, maybe something got messed up in the translation here. Let's see what happens. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. It doesn't seem to be working, but that's all right. We can make it editable, and that should fix it. But you should be able to use a parametric object with sub-poly displacement, and it should work. But I'm not sure why it's not working now. Let's see what this does. All right, this definitely works. It should work with a parametric object too, but we can explain that further. Okay, so notice what it's doing with this. It's giving a really heightened geometry, and it's taking that texture and making it look like a physical sort of object. Now this is completely ramped up and taking the texture to the max. So what we can do here is we can either change the strength or the height or both. So strength is going to be how much of the displacement is being used. So if we ramp it really far down, you're going to get a much subtler kind of view, right? And if we go up a little bit more, let's just bring it up to like 10%, and let's render between these. You should be able to see a difference. So the nice thing about rendering to the picture viewer is that you can click between these and compare, right? So this is the bump channel. This is the displacement channel. So here you can see the edges are being more affected by that, whereas this, the edge is very smooth around across the surface. You can also change the height of it. So if you want to have it be really, intense, but you don't want the height to be affected too much, you could just bring it down by half, and then you can see the difference between these. So it's subtly different. This is, less strength, less contrast. This is more contrast, but it's not protruding out as far with the texture. And with displacement, you can do a lot of really interesting things. You can make the surface of water. You can make really, subtle, sort of smooth curvilinear textures. You don't have to have an image texture to use this. You could use another sort of thing. So if we wanted to make, for example, if we take this and instead of the photo texture, we could use a noise shader. So if we did something that's a bit smoother and curvilinear, we can do this. Burundi, for example. Let's bring the global scale up to like 300, so it's really big, kind of cellular. And then we could see what that looks like as opposed to that really image-based one. So you see this is much more sort of like kind of curvilinear and cellular in that way. The other thing is, let's see, round geometry. I think that is since this is spherical, we can click on round geometry, and I think that will affect, there you go. You see less of the grid that's kind of coming through. So notice it's giving this really complicated texture on the surface, which is just based on that noise shader. And you can do a lot with that combination of noise shaders coming through together and things like that. The other thing, the last thing I'll note is that, all right, I've got the height at 2, but if I ramp this up to 100%, I should see some plateauing, meaning it's going to push the texture beyond. You can kind of see it here. You see how it's like attempting to kind of like push it, but it's sort of leaving that 2-inch gap. So it's kind of giving you that strong kind of divot quality to it. So again, displacement and bump gives you that kind of like, affects the lighting, right? But doesn't affect the shape. Displacement definitely affects the shape. You can control the height and the intensity of it. And you can use image-based things or noise shaders or a variety of different things coming across to give different surfaces and qualities. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about today is alpha, which I have talked about a little bit already. Let's do alpha along with this object. Could be good. So alpha, if we create a new material, what I'm going to do here is, well, for alpha, what you can do is alpha is going to be looking for a kind of image-based map that's going to effectively have black be transparent and white be opaque, right? So the combination of those two things together. And you can use, like, if you wanted to use a logo, I think I do have a logo in here somewhere that's a PNG. I think this Hydro Flask one is not something I used. Let's just see. All right, so if I take this, you notice that the image of it is going to be translucent. It's kind of wrapping that Hydro Flask image around it. If I put that on the sphere, this one, then it's going to layer it up. So you see, it's on the back side, you see the Hydro Flask image on top of that. So let's actually take this, and you can move. So this offset right here, offset U, offset V, if I increase this, it's going to wrap around this way. If I move it this way, it's going to wrap around that way. If I scale it down a little bit, this way and this way, it's going to change. So you can really move things around based on that. But here you can see the logo is on top of that. So the hierarchy in the channels here would be anything that is closest to the icon is underneath, and anything further away is on top, kind of like layers in Photoshop. So alpha can work with obviously image-based things. If you can also use noise shaders. So if you went to the noise shaders, and typically here what you'd want to do is have a lot of contrast. So let's just do something like this and make the brightness higher, the contrast more. There we go. So if this were my alpha channel now I'm getting that white color with that speckly color on top kind of bleeding through. So you can use alpha to create a lot of different channels and shaders and things like that on top, one on top of another on top of another. And the cool thing is, notice how it's reflecting in here, and let's look at the translucency of that as well. The top layer of that color is opaque, and so it's also going to block out light, which is pretty cool. So when we see this from this perspective, notice the shadow that it's creating. The alpha is actually blocking the physical light that's sort of trying to pass through as well. So it's kind of a cool way to create you know, really interesting, complicated textures. Again, anything that has to do with logos, you know, like I've got this hand sanitizer with this clear logo on it. You could totally do something like that by layering over an alpha channel and building it through in that sort of way. So alpha gives you a lot of power to add all kinds of different things to it. I'm just going to make another alpha channel. Let's do one. Let's see. So I'll make a new one. I'm going to make this one. Let's see. We'll make it kind of a rusty color. Yeah. And then let's do the alpha. Let's see if we can do the rust surface. I'm curious. If we go here, we make this black, 100% black. Okay. And we make this white. Okay, now I'm starting to get that kind of alpha channel. And let's see what this looks like. So if I put this now on this one, and it should get some of that rust kind of showing up on the surface. Let's see what it did. Okay, there we go. So we're getting these little splotches of this rusty kind of color coming across the surface, affecting that thing. Actually, what could be even better than that would be sorry, I could really go on a tangent here. I won't go too far, I promise. Let's just do rust texture, and let's grab this. This is a good one. Okay, let's go back here and go to the color, and instead of the color, let's add the image. Because now we got a little bit more kind of bumpy surface. So let's look at what that does now with the alpha as that rusty thing. Hoping it's cool. Yeah, that looks better. I mean, it's a little blurry, but you know, I think it gives you that kind of quality of what we're talking about, giving it a little bit more texture, a little bit more surface. So between photo textures and alpha channels, you can really do a lot to layer up objects to make them really, really detailed and really have an interesting hierarchy. So things like scratches are really cool. You can download all kinds of alpha channel scratches to add on surface. Dust and dirt and stuff like that can all be done with those sort of alpha channels as well. So that is a great way to start thinking about how you can use multiple different materials kind of coming together to give a variety of different surfaces and tones for your overall shading. Okay, I know that was a lot, right? But ultimately what I want you guys to do is two things. First, I want you to be able to understand how to make materials that you want to make, right? Because sometimes you just can't find what you're looking for, right? And the other thing is I want you to be able to go to the content browser, you know, and search up like, let's just do fabric. I'm going to open up this fabric folder. And I want you to be able to take an object like this, right? And I want you to be able to hack it, right? And so when you hack it, you have to know what's happening in the color channel. Oh, so this is a gradient that they're using to start out with. And then the bump channel is this pattern, right? And and the reflectance is this sort of thing. And I can go in and I can adjust stuff and use these different things accordingly, right? So just as a quick example, knowing this, I could go in and change this color and make it, you know, a different color, and that should affect nothing. It affected a little bit. I guess I'd have to also go into the reflectance and change these colors as well. And that should start to, there we go. Okay, so that actually, that's kind of cool. That looks more sort of, so that's really changed overall kind of what the look of this material has done, right? So again, you don't have to make all your own textures. I'm not looking for you to be an expert in texturing, but I do want you to be able to think about how you can use textures effectively, how you can hack things that you find. And also, I do think it's important sometimes to, like, if you have a logo, to be able to photograph it, make it an alpha, add it to a scene. Or if you like the way that this concrete floor looks, to photograph it and turn it into a seamless texture so you could use it for other materials. So there's a lot of things that we can do with that. And so if you do have specific questions about how to make a certain material, you know, feel free to ask. I'm happy to entertain those. And also, finally, I did post on, let's see if I'm remembered here. Okay, good. On Canvas, under Cinema 4D resources, I posted some new links. So some model downloads and then materials and assets are really good. So these are all good sites for materials. This one at the bottom I liked a lot. I learned a lot from this. I just found it the other day, but there's really cool links down at the bottom of where you can find really good materials. So Motion Squared, the French Monkey, Treasure Hunt, all of these things. Qixel Megascans is pretty amazing. I like this one a lot, the NASA repository. So you could go here and grab, like, you know, the Apollo footprint and turn that into a texture and make it a displacement and have your own Apollo. I don't know, stuff like that I think is pretty fascinating. So definitely go through here. There's a lot of good resources on this website. This one is pretty awesome. There are lots of, you know, let's just look up a rock. Lots of amazing rock textures that you could download and use. So definitely look for those on the on Cinema 4D resources, and I added some things about free model downloads as well, so you can take a look at that.